Hey there kids, it's your good buddy, Uncle Ben, and welcome to a new installment of FAQ, the only FAQ series. You can Google that. Don't Google that. Stay here and watch the video. Next question here is a doozy, and it comes from my patron, John Horak. He asks, when I am improvising, I have no problem moving between positions on the neck, but I tend to play notes in consecutive order, which can sound like scales. Do you have a suggestion to mix things up and improve my phrasing? Great question. So this is a really common problem that I see. Guys learn a ton of different scale patterns and stuff, and then when they go to improvise and use them, it just kind of sounds like it's practice time in the middle of their solo, and they're simply playing up and down scale patterns that they've memorized. Sounds like this. Boring. That is a problem that I am all too familiar with because I sounded exactly like that for years and played really boring improvised solos. I think part of that is because I had this mentality that, well, all these notes are in key, right? So they should sound good, but I just kind of play up and down patterns like that, and it got boring really fast. We tend to view scales on guitar as just big boxes, right? Patterns that we can walk up and down. And I find a lot of times whenever we are improvising and thinking about a particular scale shape, it's kind of like the scale shape will make the choices for us, right? You'll play the next note in the pattern, well, because it's the next note, not for any particular reason per se, but because you're kind of programmed into thinking about this big blocky scale pattern. So whenever I feel like my playing is starting to get really stiff like that, one thing that I like to do is to impose limitations on myself. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this, because what you'll find is if you set up parameters of what you can and can't do, like let's say you can only use this string or this set of strings, right? You'll find yourself playing things that you never would have before. You won't just simply be playing the next note in the scale because it's the next note. You kind of got to make a reason to play that next note in the scale, right? Or maybe jump up to one that might be better for the chord or whatever. So for example, a lot of times whenever I'm having a day where I feel really stiff with my soloing like that, I'll make myself just stay on one string only. And I'll end up playing a lot more lyrically and I think a lot more interesting stuff than I would if I was playing up and down a box. You just end up playing stuff that you wouldn't do if you're playing up and down a big 6-string box pattern. Somewhere in there, I think I played something that was like, a phrase something like that, where it was like a note, skip a note, go back a note, then that same idea somewhere else in the scale. That's definitely not something I would play if I was playing a big vertical shape. This is also one of the best things that you can do for yourself as a player to learn a scale inside and out, because whenever you just play this, like a big box shape for an A minor scale, you just kind of learn 5-7-8, 5-7-8, 5-7. But whenever you're having to play that scale laterally, like I was doing right there, you either end up learning the notes that are in it, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A in this case, or the step pattern that's in it, root note, step, half, step, step, half, step, step, or best of all, the intervals, root second, flat third, fourth, fifth, flat sixth, flat seven, root. And that will teach you way more about music than just memorizing more patterns that your fingers wander up and down with. I might even limit myself to saying I'm just going to solo on a certain set of strings, like let's say D, G, and B. Now I know that completely spits in the face of the Yngwie Malmsteen doctrine of more is more, because how could less be more, right? But I know for myself, whenever I impose those kinds of limitations on my playing, I end up playing way more creatively than if I just let my muscle memory decide my licks for me. Limitations breed creativity, and they really test the limitations of what our brains can do with very little. I mean, this is the same basis as like every major food culture around the world, right? Like all the great food cultures, none of them are based around the fact that their region has literally every ingredient available and bountiful. All the great cuisines are based on a couple of simple things that they have laying around that are cheap and easy to find, and they've just figured out how to do the absolute most with them. This exact same reason is why I've been working on improvising on bass a lot here lately, because you only got 4 strings, you can't go up all that far, so you end up having to play laterally a whole lot more and really stretch those ideas and get creative. Another big pitfall that players make whenever they're improvising in a scale pattern like that is they don't mix up their rhythmic phrasing at all. They'll just play straight triplets or 16s or whatever, and that's when your ear can really hear, oh, this guy's just walking up and down a scale pattern. But if you mix up the groove and really change up the subdivisions and your phrasing rhythmically, I think it can really disguise the simplicity of what we're doing a lot of times. Let's say, for example, I'm just going to walk down this A minor scale right here, but I'm not going to do it with any kind of normal rhythm. It's really going to disguise the very mundane contour of the line to our ears just because the rhythm is interesting. That entire time, I never skipped a note, I never jumped around, I walked down the scale and I walked up. But because I kept the rhythm interesting, it made it a lot more pleasant to listen to. I think at this point it's also worth mentioning that practicing scales straight up and down is kind of a waste of time because you're never going to play that in a solo, right? But that's how everybody tells us to practice them. In reality, it's good to practice them that way to learn the shape of a scale, but then as soon as you got that down, you're better off practicing a cool intervallic idea, like maybe practicing through a scale in ascending 4s, ascending 3s, or even picking an interval, like practicing through the minor pentatonic scale in 4ths. Those are things you can use in an actual musical context, but I think that we're all encouraged to practice scales up and down with our metronome, even though that's something that you'll never really do, right? So in summary, I would say when you're improvising, try really limiting yourself to only playing on 1 or 2 strings at a time, and then whenever you are using gigantic scale patterns, don't allow yourself to play strictly up and down them. It's just not really a very musical choice. And even if you are, try changing up your rhythmic variations to make it more interesting to the listener. Last question here comes from my patron Bill Klein, who asks, thoughts on the new Quad Cortex? Now, the Quad Cortex is the new piece of modeling gear from the people over at Neural DSP, which is the software arm of Dark Glass. Dark Glass is the company that makes all the bass gear that I use. I use that Alpha Omega head back there all the time back in the days of live gigs, and hopefully sooner than later I'll be using it again, playing shows, standing up, playing the big guitar and stuff. I love the Dark Glass stuff. Even before I had the amp, I was using the preamps like the vintage microtubes and stuff like that. I really think they make incredible stuff, and I use their plugins all the time with my bass gear as well whenever I'm recording. I got to try the Quad Cortex out at the last Winter NAMM show in early 2020, and I was extremely impressed. I thought that it sounded very cool. I tried it out on headphones, which is definitely a different game than hearing, 12-inch speakers destroying air molecules in front of you and stuff. But even on headphones, it sounded really good, and it felt really good. It felt very amp-like, which is what you're always going for with these pieces of modeling gear, The delays and reverbs sounded great. I was able to dial in a great kind of Marshall, kind of brown sound, British kind of distorted tone like I like within minutes. It was very easy to operate. And I've been very impressed with everybody's demos too, from Ola to Ryan Bruce to everybody else that's been putting up demonstrations of how great these things sound within the past couple months. I think it's a really cool piece of gear that has a ton of potential, and it doesn't surprise me because the folks over at Dark Glass really make incredible stuff, so it just makes sense. They're kind of like the Tesla of the guitar world. So there you go, guys, another installment of FAQ You down the tubes. If you want to see your question featured on the next episode, be sure to sign up to my Patreon page over at patreon.com/BenEllerGuitars. Even for just $1 a month, you'll get access to a ton of backing tracks, bonus lessons, and so much more, so don't delay. Sign up today. Thanks for watching, and thanks a ton to my Patreon community for submitting so many cool questions for this episode. But now it's time to get away from the mobile device and go play some guitar. Less clicking, more picking.